All right, we are on. This is exciting. Welcome, everyone. I am Ian Gardner, as the intro said. I'm Scottish. I'm also Australian. I live in Sydney. I'm a co-founder at Innovation Bay, as was alluded, also an investor with Jelix Ventures, which is a seed stage venture fund. And previous to that, I was the head of startups for AWS across Australia and New Zealand. So I love startups. I mean, that's part of the reason I'm here, I guess. Look, one of the best things about my job or jobs is I get to meet some remarkable people. We do a lot of events. I run a podcast. We've had over 100 episodes. And through that, I get to interview some incredible people. Luke is definitely one of my favorite interviewees. In fact, he's so good. He's the only person to have been on our podcast twice. He's smart, he's direct, he's an amazing leader, and he's built one of Australia's best startups, SafetyCulture. So, Luke, I think I've known you, 5 years, 6 years now. So, I've seen a lot of the journey. So you've got an amazing story. So welcome, Luke.
Thanks, Ian. Good to be here. Hi, everyone.
Yeah, look, let's go back a little bit in your journey and just start with some context. Where are you from? Because it's a little bit remote, and can you maybe just give us some context around that place and how remote that really is?
Yeah, I grew up in a place called Townsville, which is regional Australia, up in North Queensland near the Great Barrier Reef. And it's definitely not the tech epicenter of the world. The idea, I think, of building a tech company out of Townsville is not something that I thought about when I was growing up. And yet here we are.
And look, jumping back then, some of the early days, it wasn't a natural progression from regional kid to tech titan. Can you talk about some of the early days? I think the introduction talked about the days of Private Investigator. Tell us about the genesis of SafetyCulture.
Yeah, look, I did a lot of things. I had my first business when I was 16, had a bunch of different jobs. And then I ended up getting a job as a trainee private investigator and thought that would be cool, spying on people running in a surveillance team. And it was really cool. I spied on people who were being injured at work every day, and would go out and see what they did. So it would be sitting in the back seat of the car, not like in the movies where you're in the front seat holding a camera. You always actually jump into the back seat when you're doing surveillance. And there's all these little tricks of the trade, which made it a lot of fun. And eventually though, I guess I got tired of seeing all these people who'd been injured through what was really preventable incidents. And so I started thinking, sitting in the back seat of the car, what could I do to help people avoid some of these incidents? And that's kind of the genesis, I guess. The company started with that intention.
There's a few other components or parts of the journey. At one point you're kind of out of cash or running out of cash, and you kind of had to get a bit inventive as to how to keep the doors open. So tell us about that.
You talking about when I did the Tough Man Challenge? That's when I was 20, just after I'd started working as a PI. I went to a Tony Robbins conference and wrote down a goal to make 40 grand a month, and I was earning about $700 a week. And so I thought, I don't know how I'm going to do this. And a friend of mine once talked at school about doing like a Tough Man Challenge, a no rules boxing competition, which was a crazy idea, something we knew nothing about. But I thought that's what I would do to make 40 grand. And so I rang up Steve. He now worked at Muffin Break. And I said, hey, do you want to do this Tough Man Challenge you talked about? And he's like, no way, you're crazy. And so I went and did it on my own. And long story short, I lived out of my car, and I'd go into the hotel across the road from where I was sleeping, and I'd unplug their swimming pool filter at like 10 o'clock each night when the pool closed, and plug my phone in so I could charge it up because I didn't have an in-car charger. And then I'd have to get back by 6 in the morning before the cleaner would come and swap it over again. And then I could ring people and organise the event. So 1,500 people turned up. I'm 20, organising the whole thing on my phone. No one knew I was some kid that had no idea. And I'd sort of put a bit of a mature voice on. And then it all worked out. And it was on ABC and stuff. There was all these stories on it. But no one really knew the story about me leaving the car. They just thought I was this guy that went and organize this event.
Yeah, wow. So you could have been the next Dana White if you'd had a different life for the UFC, Aussie UFC. Sounds amazing.
It's worked out all right for Dana. So I perhaps, but that would be a different life, one very different to what I have today. That's for sure.
Yeah. I know there's some, I want to, you've launched SafetyCulture, so it's up and running a bit. And there was a bit of a metamorphosis from what you were doing to the early days of SafetyCulture. But do you want to just touch on the, the early hires that you made and the way that you raised your first funding?
Yeah, I literally walked out to the university. They had about 30 computer science graduates a year. And I just met with the head of the computer science program, Professor Ian Atkinson, and just said, this is what I'm trying to do. I got this idea to build an app. And he introduced me to someone who dropped out of uni. It's always a good prerequisite for a co-founder or someone to help. And Alan and I sat down on my kitchen bench and started coding, and that's kind of, I guess, was the beginning of it. And we just then, customers were using iAuditor, the checklist app. They were using it to do all these checks and relying on it to run their businesses. We even had, an airline in South America say how they were now inspecting all their aircrafts and how much they depended on it. We're like two guys in a garage, and someone lost their device. I remember that. They said, we've lost an iPad. Where's all this backed up? We're thinking, like, it's not backed up anywhere. Like, it's on your device. And so, I turned to Alan and said, who do you know that can build a cloud? And he was like, oh, my friend Tristan's pretty smart. He's never built a cloud though. So, away we went. And we just kept literally trying to hire people that were smarter than us and could help. And it then moved into my garage from the kitchen and got some air conditioning in the garage because it's hot in Townsville. And we just, away we went. People were downloading it, using it all around the world. And then we had, Blackbird came, they heard about us. I got the first pair of Google Glass actually in Australia. We got it out of the US and ended up on TV. And then Blackbird said, oh, can we come up and see you guys? So that was kind of how it all started.
Yeah, and Blackbird, for those that don't know, I mean, it's one of probably the best known VCs in Australia, one of the earliest. I mean, I think they raised the first fund 2012, 2013.
Yeah.
Yeah, and as well as you, they've also invested in Canva and Zoox and CultureAmp and a few other amazing businesses, which have gone on to become unicorns. Yes, but I remember you told this story before, so I've heard it before, but can you tell us about the first meeting with Rick Baker when he came up to see you?
Oh, yeah. So he came down the driveway and...
I'm sorry, Rick is the partner at Blackbird.
Yeah, so Rick Baker from Blackbird, he came down the driveway and I said to everyone, like, we've got a venture capitalist coming. We didn't even know what a venture capitalist was. Well, we've got this important person coming. Everyone's going to have to wear shoes and make sure that we're, all fully clothed and stuff. It was just like, it was a riffraff, sort of a grouping of people. And so I went to Subway and we got the platter and laid it out for him. And, how do you impress this guy? And so the other thing we did was we talked about whenever we responded to an email, we didn't know whether to say good morning to a customer or good afternoon, depending on where they were in the world. And so we kept saying we should have like clocks up with different zones or something. Anyway, we're like, okay, he's coming. We should definitely go and get these clocks. And so we went to Kmart and got these $5 clocks, put them up on the wall and just double-sided taped them on there. And then while he's talking, and sitting there listening, I'm trying to explain how we're, transforming the way that teams work and all this kind of stuff. Like Tokyo just falls off the wall and smashes on the ground. And Rick turns around and says, oh, your clock's just fallen down. And I'm like, oh, that's never happened before, which is true story. And then meanwhile, the other guys are messaging each other saying, London's about to go, someone go and grab London. And so they're trying to tap these clocks back. It was pretty chaotic, but I think it was more the customers that we had and the people using our product that impressed him, not so much the clocks in our garage. But
I think that's true. I mean, that's maybe a good segue onto telling us where you're at now. So, fast forwarding 5 years, 6 years. I mean, where is SafetyCulture at now? How many customers you go? Who are they? How are they using it? Like, where have you got to?
Yeah, so we started off with this kind of checklist app. Now we're really an operations platform for teams when they report incidents, when they need training. We're now also an insurance company, so we can underwrite their insurance. And we're also integrating with all sorts of other data and hardware so that people can create workflows based on what's happening in the workplace. And so it's kind of evolved. There's about 28,000 companies that uses different teams. And what other metrics? They do about 600 million checks a year. manually with iAuditor, so they're checking things in the workplace. We acquired EdApp, the training micro-learning platform, last year, which I think is a fantastic addition, and customers love that. We raised, I don't know, maybe 180 million or so in funding, and just continuing to build it out. And I think the valuation last year was at 400 early in the year, and then by May we did around at 1.35 billion. And then there's probably some news coming about a different one fairly soon as well.
All right. Well, that's like an amazing, not quite rags to riches, but an amazing story of your progression, Luke. So that's awesome. Did we get this answer? Like, how many staff have you got now?
Yeah, there's about 550 odd, I guess now. Yeah, it keeps growing every month, but yeah, there's about 550 spread between the US, UK, Australia, and some in Manila.
Yeah, because I definitely want to ask about that. I'll maybe leave that till later, just about the culture. You know, you're one of the best places to work. You keep winning awards for that sort of stuff. But before I do that, and before I ask any more, I know there's a chat room running. We are keen to take questions from the audience, and the best place to put them is in the chat room. We've got some people watching that, and they'll send it straight to me. So if you've got anything you want to ask Luke, stick it in there, and we'll try and get to it. Look, let's talk about COVID. I mean, last year was pretty weird for everyone. I think it's fair to say Australia and New Zealand and a few other countries have handled it pretty well. I mean, we've got a pretty compliant population that kind of do as they're told, and we've got leaders and scientists that seem to have come up with pretty good strategies. So, overall, we've had under 30,000 cases in total, less than 1,000 deaths, which is still tragic and a lot, but it's, relatively speaking, very few. We're kind of a steady state of zero right now. Have you got any insights? I mean, you've obviously thought about this from your customers' perspective, and I'm sure you're seeing a global thing, but also your staff. Any insights on what others can learn from Australia's success?
Yeah, look, it's pretty interesting, I think, and we'll look back and learn a lot from this period as well, and particularly how teams have responded to dealing with it. Everybody's worked from home and all that kind of stuff that we've all talked about in other forums. But I think innovation is driven by constraints and imperatives, and there's no better time to innovate than when the pressure's on and things are changing fast. And we've seen some incredible, I guess, transitions for teams where they've been focused on a particular goal, and all of a sudden they got taken out underneath them. And one of the things that I've been always challenged by with our product teams and our marketing teams is that we've built products that go across many industries. We're used in everywhere from hospitals through to Amazon fulfillment centers and things like that. And so it was always a case of, can we just focus on one industry, because then our messaging, our marketing, all these kind of things will get simpler. But once COVID happened, it was actually the fact that we were across so many industries that it gave us a layer of insulation. And some of our customers in aviation or in hotels or cruise ships, they're all our customers, they were absolutely decimated, like went back to virtually zero. And then we saw other customers in online e-commerce, fulfillment centers, things like that, hospitals, health, they ramped up like crazy. And so there were winners and losers. And for us, it was the fact that we were across so many different industries that we were able to weather the storm. It gave us some protection from it. But I think at the same time, our teams have had to think differently about how we work together, and our customers have certainly taught us how important our products are through COVID. And we can see around the world, as cities are reopening, we can see the activity levels coming back up as restaurants reopen and they're checking, their fridge temperatures and their floors and things like that. We get to see all that data. And then as lockdowns would happen, it would close back down again. And so we could see the businesses that were able to reopen fastest and get back to best practice quickest were the ones that were able to operate better through that, as opposed to others were struggling to comply with local laws and all that sort of stuff. So it's been a fascinating time, and one that I hope we don't ever have to repeat. But I think some of the lessons are still going to come through in the years ahead when we look back and kind of understand just how important it is to have a challenge that everybody's aligned with, and you have that vision, and being able to adapt it when circumstances change around you. It's kind of it's been key for us.
I mean, that must make you and I guess your team feel pretty good. I mean, like you've helped keep people safe, and you've helped customers survive or thrive or, hunker down during all this. So yeah, does that make you guys feel good?
Yeah, it does. The team morale's great. There's a bunch of factors. Last year, we also started a regular process now where employees can participate in selling some of their equity when we do funding rounds. So we're sort of now running a strategy where we do small rounds more often, and you allow employees to participate. It kind of gives us a bit of, time to not have to be IPOing as early as you otherwise would, so that employees could get some cash for their equity. But there's the fact that people, I think, have been able to continue to build their teams and grow throughout COVID. We kept hiring, and all those factors play a part. But I think also you've got to be careful not over-index for trying to create comfort and happiness across everybody in times like this, where we're all doing surveys on the team every week and all that kind of stuff, and you want to measure morale and make sure that you spot problems early, which is important. But fulfillment comes from a great challenge where we really take on something that's amazing. And I think some teams, some companies have lost sight of that a little bit, and they're then over-indexing for trying to make everybody comfortable. And so we've kind of been pretty deliberate about continue to challenge people to make sure that they feel they're really engaged and working on something that excites them. And the fulfillment comes from that, not so much from making sure we've got enough almond milk in the fridge, or the ping pong tables got new bats all the time. Yeah. The perks,
I want to just a reminder to the audience, keep the questions coming in. I know there's some that we've got, so I'll keep them up my sleeve but I want to ask you this one first, Luke. So scaling, I mean, your progression in the last 5 or 6 years from sort of regional kid running a small startup to this tech titan has been remarkable, but it's never easy. I mean the public perception is, wow, he's made it, what a great journey. But do you want to touch on some of the moments during that have been hard, and what maybe some of the audience can learn from that?
Yeah, I call it perpetual incompetence is what it feels like for me. The minute I ever figure out how to do something, I then have to hire someone who can do it better than me and continue to take it further. And so then I go on to the next thing that I don't know how to do. And so I'm perpetually incompetent, forever feeling like I'm not actually the master of anything. But that's the nature of scaling a business. You're constantly putting yourself out of a job. And I think you want to be always assessing whether or not the decisions that you're making today are the same ones I was making 6 months ago or a year ago, because I need to continue to push those decisions down so I can think about the next stage and make the decisions that are required for that. So that's kind of been the steady state. It's constantly feels like you're never the master of anything. But in terms of some of those moments, we migrated our whole back end years ago from App Engine across to AWS. And
I remember that.
What's that?
I remember that.
Yeah, exactly. And so that was like 2014, and we had an engineer come from Sweden who was amazing. He was a genius. He walked in and said, all the engineers we have here are terrible. I can rebuild the whole back end in 3 months. I'll do it on my own, and then it'll be amazing. And it was tough because we're all learning. We're a bunch of guys from Townsville. And fair enough, he was probably smarter than us. But 3 months later, he bailed and hadn't finished it and said it was harder than he thought and hadn't done any documentation. No one knew what he'd done. And so, to their credit, the guys kind of looked at each other and picked it up and away they went. And each month, we thought it would be about another month's work. And each month I was doing videos to our customers saying, we'll have this new back end in a month. And after about 3 or 4 months, I just stopped doing videos. And then we hired Anton Mascavoy, who was the third employee at Atlassian after Mike and Scott, and he came in and helped us. And it wasn't real good, actually. A few months in, he sort of looked at me and said, this is the first time in my career, I really don't know if we're actually going to be able to do this and if we have the team to do it. And I'm like, that's not what you meant to tell me. But anyway, we got it done. Anton was amazing, and we had beds in the office, and we worked through a weekend and did the whole migration, and it worked. It took a year, but we got there. So, there's stuff like that. Back then, the fear was, are we even going to survive? Like it was a different fear to today. You're constantly worried about how are we even going to make it through this next big challenge? Whereas today, the fears are different, and the fears around how do we maintain a culture of innovation? How do we maintain that customer centricity in all that we do? How do we just obsess about the problem that we're solving for our customers and amplify that across teams? You know, I used to go and jump on a plane and go and visit customers in Belgium at a wind farm, or, you know, local councils or a health department in New York, or even just around the corner from where I lived in Townsville, the fire department. And I would constantly learn from the customers what we were doing for them and what they needed to do. As we get to 500 people, it's hard. You can't have 500 people constantly out there just talking to customers all the time. But somehow we've got to always find the gap, or find a way to bridge the gap. And it's tricky. But, you know, scaling a business is very different. I enjoy the founder work, but not so much the CEO work. So the running of the business.
Touching that. So what's the difference between being a founder and being a CEO?
I think the founder work is more about like creating something out of nothing. It's taking an idea and a problem and developing a solution for it and a strategy, and then going after it, and you pull together the people. The day-to-day operations then of how do you keep those people on track? How do you have accountability for them? All the systems, you know, targets. Like, I'm never one for that sort of stuff. I've never been really big on that. I just very much focused on, let's solve the problem better than anyone else in the world. Let's help the teams of our customers do their best work of their lives every day. And the scoreboard being the revenue and you know, profitability, all these things, the scoreboard will take care of itself. Being able to raise money, all those things are fairly straightforward if you do an amazing job of solving the customer problem. And I think that's something that you know, we've got to keep thinking about. But personally, that's not necessarily my skill set. You know, you work out, you know, OKRs, whatever. Not that we use that stuff, but I just I'm more about, you know, where should we be 3, 5, 7 years from now, as opposed to what's our quarter going to look like. And so I think the CEO side of things is trying to keep people going in the sort of short to medium term. And you could argue into the longer, but the founder is clearly operating further ahead. And so for me, that's the difference. And it's just something that I've had to keep hiring around me, and we're doing it again now as we're sort of bringing in other executives and roles that we haven't had before, so that they can take big parts of the business and go and build them and run them. And I'm freed up. Yeah.
All right, look, let's take a few questions from the audience. Lenka, hey Lenka, can you tell us how you got your first customer?
Yeah, so it's kind of a bit of a boring story in the sense that I ordered it to the App Store, you know, the greatest distribution platform ever built. It's meant that for free, we could get our product in the hands of people all over the world. And so to this day, we've never had external salespeople. We have some inside salespeople that help our existing customers, but we don't actually know who our first customer was because they came through the App Store, and Apple had the details, and they just started using it. And because we had no cloud back then, we didn't even know, you know, who the details, like their email addresses or anything. But our first sort of significant customer was probably Coles, supermarkets all over Australia, where they came to us and said, our teams are starting to use this, and we want to roll it out nationally to 760 stores. And so I remember that was the first. And then we come up against all the big company challenges where they're saying, well, you need to build this for us, and we'll pay you a lot of money to do it, but you're effectively then employed by them. And so we pushed back and said no to that. GE got us to Schenectady, North New York, and showed us where Thomas Edison's lab was and all this stuff. And then they said, now we want you guys to build this for us. We want this to be a GE platform. And again, we had to say, well, no, we're going to build this for many people. And so the first significant customer would have been Coles, but the actual very first customer, I have no idea who it was.
Yeah, that might keep on that theme. Ariel has asked a question. Hey, Ariel, what is your approach to getting to the core of a customer's problem?
Go and walk in the customer's shoes. Get out there in their world, and just forget everything you know, and try to think about what is it that they're trying to do? What's their end goal? Like, forget about using our technology. Just what's the end goal for them and their customer? And whether that be like a fire department where we'd go out and they would say, well, we need to go and inspect buildings and make sure they're compliant. We need to inspect our trucks, and all this gear's got to go in there. We just learn all these amazing things. I was at a mine site, a Fortescue metal site in the Pilbara last year, and it was 40 odd degrees, and they were peeing in cups and taking urine samples to check their dehydration during the day, and they were putting the results in our app in iAuditor. And I was like, I didn't know anyone was doing this. And I'm like, no, we have people, a couple of people each year die. They just drop from heat exhaustion and dehydration. And it's like, no, we take it really seriously. And so by going out into the customer's world, you get to experience the problems that they're trying to solve. And I think this is where the art and the balance between taking customer feedback too literally versus trying to design a future for the customer comes in. And trying to get that balance right is tricky. But if you just build what the customers want, chances are you probably won't be incredibly innovative, or you'll only solve a problem for a small customer set. So we kind of step back and say, how do we build for 80% of our customers? You map a solution onto all different customer use cases and think, does this work for all these different customers? Or is this just something that that works for a few customers? And I think that's the place to start.
Let's talk about acquisitions. So EDAP, I think, was the one you acquired. Was that your first acquisition?
It was, yeah.
I mean, so I just want to, now that you're at that point where, you've got access to capital and, corporate advisors and all that other good stuff that comes with scale, and you can acquire, how do you think about it? This sort of whole buy versus build concept.
Yeah, it's interesting because we were building our own training product internally, and we just got to know Darren, the founder of EDAP. I think Apple introduced us and said, you guys should get together and talk. And we just got along well. I loved their product, what they were doing, and offered to help in any way I could, and whether it be advice or sharing experiences that we had had. And then Darren came back a bit later and said, we're actually thinking about funding. Can you help us? And I'm happy to help. I was also pretty happy to just invest as well, from SafetyCulture's point of view, because I think they were doing some great work. And so that relationship kind of was built over 2.5 years. And I heard a story secondhand that Mark Zuckerberg had a similar thing with Yarn when he bought WhatsApp, where over a couple of years he got to know them, and it became obvious that they should do something together. And so I think it was a similar model where you get to know a founder, and that's what I look for really, as other great founders, where you can support them in whatever way they need you to support them in. And it's not always going to directly benefit SafetyCulture. But I think it's more important that you help them in their vision. And if their goal is aligned with what we're trying to achieve, then maybe it does make sense at some point to team up. But it's got to work for everyone. And we were very conscious of not burdening the EDAP team with the SafetyCulture way of doing things. We basically said, this is your vision. We're here to support you. Democratize training and learning across the world. Make it available to everyone. Tell us what you need. You can leverage our customers. You can leverage our platform, whatever you like, or not. We're just here to help you. And I think as a founder, I know myself, if someone come to me and they're genuinely trying to help me, regardless, and Scott Farquhar's been that person for me for a long time, then I'll get a lot more value from them than if they had an agenda and say, look, we're trying to invest and then we're going to acquire and all that. Like, I just don't think that's a goal that anyone should have. It's more of a case of helping other founders do their best work.
Well, let me ask about Scott, because you mentioned him. So Scott, for those that don't know, is one of the co-founders at Atlassian. And Atlassian is, they are Australia's greatest startup success story. I mean, I think it's a $60-70 billion listed company. Mike and Scott, who are co-founders, I think they're worth $20 billion each. Just built an amazing business. They're down to earth. They're great people. Scott was an angel investor, if you like, in the early rounds. So how did that come about, and what's it like having such a brilliant billionaire on speed dial as your mentor?
It's been amazing. So I didn't know who Scott or Mike Cannon-Brookes were when Blackbird first came to Townsville, but they were investors in the original fund of Blackbird. And as part of the investment process, the first $1 million that we took, we had to be interviewed by them, and they had to approve the investment. And so I met them on Skype individually, and Scott just genuinely was quite interested in what I was doing and was offering to help. And so that grew into a friendship where sometimes we'd go back and forth on things a couple of times in a week, and then we may not talk for a couple of months, depending on what was happening. But he did a couple of things. First thing he did was every time we'd meet, he'd ask how I'm going. And he'd actually want to know the answer. There's a lot of people you meet in building a company who, ask how you're going, but it's just kind of a formality. Scott understood as a founder that if I was doing okay, then I could contribute significantly to the business. But if I wasn't, then that would be a limiting factor. And so he was always there to help me personally. And I think I've sort of adopted that as well when I meet with other founders. Like, what do you need? How are you doing? And you need to be able to be honest with each other, I think, to be able to really help each other. And so Scott's at a personal level been that for me. And then at a strategic level and business level, he's helped us, interview people over the years and do different things. He's been very, very generous with his time and obviously continue to invest in the subsequent rounds. And so to have someone who has that experience, like I learned so much from operators versus advisors. And that's why I chuckled before when you said you now have lots of advisors and people you can call on. It's like, I learn the most from people who have done it before, and they can speak about real experiences. And I always encourage other people to filter advice, so that they prioritize, getting advice from operators versus, people who have read the latest blog post.
So every founder who's listening in should immediately go out and get a brilliant billionaire on their cap table and as a mentor.
Take whoever you can get. Take whoever you can get.
It's never quite that easy. Let's maybe take another couple of questions. Bonnie, sounds like a Scottish name. Hey, Bonnie. You said being perpetually incompetent is part of scaling a business. How do you constantly manage the unknown?
How do I constantly manage the what?
The unknown.
You get more used to it, I think. In the earlier days, the uncertainty is really tough because everything's up in the air. But the uncertainty actually narrows down over time because, as I was saying, we used to question whether we even survive. Now we don't question if we're going to survive. The question of, are we truly going to change the way the world works, or are we just going to be, a successful company? And so the uncertainty is not as great as it was, albeit the opportunities got bigger. It gets easier over time from that point of view. Someone asked recently, was last year the hardest year of your life? I was like, hell no. Like, we were in a much more comfortable position than we were back in the day where you had so much uncertainty that you didn't even know how you're going to be able to pay the bills. Like, that's the toughest time for anyone who's trying to start. So you grow used to the uncertainty, and then the things you're uncertain about change over time. It's a different type of uncertainty, but staying focused on the prize is the key. The customer, the problem we're solving, and just go after that relentlessly. That's the best way to deal with it. Not to dwell on the uncertainty, because you're just not going to have the answers.
Yeah. All right, we're getting towards the end here, Luke. So let's maybe change pace and just ask a few more quick fire questions. So another one from Bonnie. Do you have any tips for prepping for meetings with VCs? I'm sure you've had some more successful, quote marks, meetings than your first one. So what do you do now?
Usually I never used a pitch deck. I always wanted to have a conversation with them, and I usually only told them what I'd done initially up to now, and I wouldn't talk about what we're going to do unless they asked questions about it. And so that created a really interesting dynamic, because the tendency is often to go in and say, we're going to do all this amazing stuff, we're going to do these things. All I'd say is, this is the problem that we found, and here's what we've done about it so far. And then just sit there and see where to from there. And if they were really engaged and they got it, they want to know more, then I'd tell them more. And most of the time, we never actually gave them the full roadmap and the full vision. We usually just gave part of it based on their appetite for it. But one of the feedbacks pieces I got was that we were trying to do too much when I tell people everything. And so now I just give them the bits they're interested in, and with a little bit of spice on top. So I'd say that's probably one of the key things, is don't get carried away with trying to promise the world. Just see if they organically and genuinely care about the problem you're solving, and if they get it, and if you can have a conversation with them about it.
Yeah. Look, there's a couple of linked questions on COVID. So one's from Haley and one's from Dan. And it's really around how you're helping businesses manage reopening. So let me ask Dan's question. Said, with everything happening with COVID, can I ask how SafetyCulture is helping people manage the risk in getting back to work?
Every week we're publishing new templates, inspections for different types of business to use based on the best practices that we're seeing around the world. So we're actually giving them the workflows to be able to reopen, things that they need to be checking, what they need to be on top of. We're also now physically providing sanitization stations as well, where you walk in and put your hands under and you get your hands sanitized. So physically having things in the workplace. And then also from a training point of view, we're publishing training content every week. There's more and more content that teams can use. United Nations are using it for a whole bunch of their stuff as well post-COVID. So we're giving those teams the workflows and the tools to be able to reopen and make sure that their teams know what they need to be doing each day.
Yeah. This isn't actually a question, but it's more a request. It says, Ian, can you recite some Ravi Burns for me, please, from Daniel? So yeah, my Twitter handle is Ravi Burns, which is a Scottish poet. So here you go. Fair for ye honest sonsae face, great chieftain or the pudding race. There you go. That's an ode to haggis. You might need some safety when you're eating haggis, but all right, let's ask another question. Sorry about that distraction. What's the number one thing that slowed you down in your journey to bring product to market? And that's from Preeti.
Probably finding the right people for the roles. So it's really hard when you're scaling a business. You don't know what great looks like in a CFO if you've never hired a CFO before or never worked with a CFO in my case. And so being able to identify what great looks like and then go and find people to fulfill that role is probably the trickiest piece. And when you get it right, it's amazing. And when you don't, it's frustrating for everyone. And so I think as we've scaled, you try and get it mostly right, but you're always going to make some mistakes. So being able to then call that out pretty early and correct for it is important. But I'd say that's the key thing is getting the right people to fill a great role.
Yeah. What advice would you give your younger self? This is from Motsumi.
Oh, crikey. Lots. But look, I think probably just worry a bit less. It's going to be okay. As much as we stress and set this ridiculously high standard for what we have to try and achieve, and we compare ourselves to everyone else, it's going to work out fine. And I think that's probably the biggest thing. The amount of nights I'd lose sleep, and you care so much, and sometimes it takes its toll. So I think probably being a bit kinder to myself at times. Prioritize a bit more for friends and family. I think there's been too many sacrifices along the way, and I probably worked and focused on stuff harder than I really needed to for fear of failing. When I probably should have just gone and had a coffee at the coffee shop or something with some friends. And
it's interesting. Most founders don't tend to focus on themselves. They're focused on their business. That's the thing that is number one. But the reality is, if your personal life, like your health or the way you're feeling or your mental health is bad, or you're struggling with it, or your relationships are struggling, so your other half doesn't like you, or your kids are playing up, or whatever it is, that directly affects your business. So you really need to focus on all three.
Yeah, Craig Tiley on Monday published, or there was an interview that was published from what he said about the Australian Open last week, the last 2 weeks, and the toll it's taken on him personally, which, I kind of read and felt for him. But I think it's important that we talk about the pressure, and it's not that you should never have the pressure. That's not realistic, but it's about managing it and making sure that we step back and have some downtime and things like that. So I think it's we kind of all know this, but doing it sometimes is harder than it sounds.
Yeah. All right, let's wrap it all up. So this is the last question. I think it should encapsulate everything we've talked about and really the theme of this. So it's from Rich. Hey, Rich, what are some of the ways you manage customer retention?
Well, the best way is to look at engagement. And so if customers are using your products every day and they are being delighted by them, then they will stay with you. And so if they're not, if you're not able to work out where those moments of delight are and those sort of wow moments for people, and you keep delivering them, then you'll lose people. And so you've got to understand how how I guess your customers are getting value, what those moments are that they really will go and tell other people about, and that they're able to repeat that every day. That's the best way. There's no sort of sneaky way to do it. It's just, it makes sure the customers get a lot of value from what you're giving them.
Yeah. All right. Our clock is saying we have 4 seconds left, so I'm going to do the unthinkable and finish on time. Luke, that was amazing. I always love chatting to you. We should go and have a beer sometime because we're allowed here. And audience, thank you. We didn't get to see you, so it just felt like Luke and I were having a chat, but I think apparently there's thousands of you out there watching. So really appreciate you giving up some time and listening to us. So yeah, Luke, thanks very much.
Thanks, Ian. It's always great to have a chat. Cheers, mate.